He didn't value your presence until your absence became the loudest thing in the room. And that's how it tends to go, doesn't it? When you're there consistently, quietly, steadily, people stop noticing. You become part of the furniture in their lives. Familiar, predictable, reliable. Not because you're dull or unworthy, but because they've mistaken your loyalty for weakness. They believed your patience meant you'd never leave. And it's easy to treat someone carelessly when you think they'll always be within reach. See, your presence was never loud, it wasn't demanding or chaotic. It was built on small and visible things. The way you remembered details no one else did. The way you listened, even when she wasn't really speaking. The way you made space for her storms without asking for anything in return. You showed up when it mattered, even when she pretended not to notice. And she did pretend, because admitting your worth would have meant admitting she wasn't matching it. And people don't like to confront what they're failing to reciprocate. So she downplayed your effort, acted as if your love was the default setting. Like it didn't take restraint to stay. Like it didn't take energy to keep forgiving. Like it didn't take strength to offer softness in the face of indifference. But you offered it anyway, for days, weeks, months, maybe even years, until something inside you shifted, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You stopped trying to be heard in a space where silence had become your only. You stopped explaining your value and started living like you believed in it. And then you left. Quietly, without drama, without one final speech, because you'd already said everything you needed to say. Through your consistency, your presence, your care. And here's what's fascinating. It's only after you're gone that the volume of what you were really offering begins to ring in their ears. That's when they realize your silence is louder than your words ever were, that your absence doesn't create space, it creates a void, because you weren't just someone in the background, you were the structure. The steady current beneath the chaos, the calm when everything else was noise. But they couldn't see it then because it didn't demand attention. It didn't scream for validation. It just was. But now there's a pause where your laugh used to be. There's a weight in the room where your presence once held things together. She scrolls through her phone, not because there's something to see, but because she's hoping for a sign of you, a like, a message, a slip, something that tells her you still care, that you still feel what you once did. Because if she can still affect you, she can still control the narrative. But the silence, the fact that you're not reacting, that terrifies her more than any fight ever could. You're not punishing her. That's not what this is. This isn't about games or trying to make her chase. It's about giving her the only thing she truly ignored. Distance. Real, uninterrupted distance. The kind that doesn't beg to be bridged. The kind that forces reflection. Because when someone is no longer overwhelmed by your presence, they're forced to face the consequences of their own behavior. And in that space, they'll either evolve or stay stuck. But that's no longer your concern. And she might say she misses you. She might say she didn't realize what she had. She might even cry. But understand something deeply. Missing someone isn't the same as valuing them. Anyone can miss the comfort of consistency. Anyone can mourn the loss of unconditional support, but that doesn't mean they're ready or willing to give back what they once took for granted. And that's where you have to hold the line, because your value doesn't increase in your absence, it just becomes visible. She didn't value your presence when it was there, not because you weren't valuable, but because she was too wrapped up in her own story to notice the one you were writing through your actions. You were the man who stayed, who supported, who listened, who tried. And now you're the man who left. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started listening to the part of yourself that said, this isn't enough anymore. And when she walks into an empty room now, when she reaches for a phone and finds silence, when she looks around and realizes no one is showing up the way you did, that's when she'll understand. That's when she'll feel what life is like without you. Not because you wanted her to suffer, but because you finally stopped suffering yourself. She thought you'd always be there, not because you told her you would, though maybe you did, in 100 small ways, but because your actions were so consistent, so steady, so full of grace that she came to believe you were permanent, like furniture, like the sun. like something she could depend on without ever needing to earn it. She mistook your presence for predictability and your love for inevitability. And so she left the door half open, always, confident you'd be waiting on the other side whenever she felt like walking through it. And maybe, for a while, you were. Maybe you left that door unlocked, left the light on, left pieces of yourself behind just in case she decided to show up. Maybe part of you hoped that if you held the line, if you stayed steady enough, she'd finally meet you with the same energy, the same commitment, the same care. But days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. She came and went, not always physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes energetically. Sometimes she was right in front of you, but not with you. Present, but unreachable. Near, but unavailable. And you kept hoping that one more show of love, one more extension of grace, one more quiet gesture of loyalty would bring her back fully. But she never really came, not the way you needed her to. And at some point, something broke. Not loudly, not with fire or rage, but quietly. A shift, subtle but irreversible. You realized that being the constant in someone else's life is exhausting when you're the only one holding the structure together. You realized you were anchoring someone who wasn't trying to steady themselves, that she was comfortable leaning but never standing. So you stepped back, not out of spite, but out of necessity. You withdrew the energy you used to give so freely. You reclaimed the emotional bandwidth that was being spent on someone who didn't recognize its cost. And that's when she noticed. That's when the absence started to echo. Because until then, she had confused your support for something bottomless. She assumed she could keep coming and going, and that you'd remain right where she left you. But you weren't a placeholder. You were a person. And people can only carry weight alone for so long. She thought you'd always be the fallback, the safety net, the quiet assurance in the background. But one day, without ceremony, you stopped being that. You stopped offering sanctuary to someone who never stayed long enough to be safe herself. And suddenly, the door she thought would always be open was closed. Not slammed, not locked in anger, just gently, firmly closed. And she stood outside of it, finally realizing it was never hers to walk through at will. She had to knock now. She had to earn her place. But even more frightening for her, you might not answer, because now she had to live with the reality she never prepared for, a life without your presence. You were the emotional center she always returned to when the world felt too heavy, when she was overwhelmed, lost, uncertain. You were the one who reminded her she was okay. You were the one who held her pieces without question. But she never stopped to ask what it cost you. She never thought about the toll it took for you to always be the strong one, the dependable one, the one who gave without asking, who stayed without needing a reason, who absorbed the weight of two people without complaint. But you're not that man anymore. Not because you've become less, but because you finally demanded more. More for yourself, more from her. Because love, true love, isn't about carrying someone endlessly. It's about walking together, sharing the weight, building something that's mutual. And once you saw that wasn't what was happening, you stopped playing along. You stopped performing for someone who didn't even realize she was in the front row of a one-man show. Now she has to live with what that really means. That when she reaches for you, you might not be there. That when life gets hard and she reflexively looks for the comfort you used to provide, she'll find space instead. Stillness. A silence that doesn't come with safety. And it's not cruel. It's not punishment. It's simply the consequence of treating love like it was a guarantee instead of a gift. And she thought you'd always be there until the moment you weren't. Love isn't about being needed. It's about being chosen. And that distinction matters more than people want to admit. See, when someone needs you, it's often rooted in fear, in weakness, in survival. But when someone chooses you, even when they don't need to, when they could walk away, stand on their own, and still look at you and say, I want you, that's love. That's respect. That's alignment. And that's what you stalked receiving. You were needed when it was convenient. when she felt weak, when the world was cold, when her insecurities screamed too loudly in the night, then you were needed, then your attention mattered. But when she felt confident, when the validation was pouring in, when she felt like she had options, then suddenly your presence became optional. You became the background again, the second tab open, always available, rarely prioritized. And for too long, you convinced yourself that being needed was enough. That if you could just prove how valuable you were, how much you cared, how loyal you could remain, eventually, she would see, she would choose you. Not as a fallback, not as a safety net, but as a man, a partner, an equal. But she didn't. And you kept waiting, you kept hoping, you kept making yourself smaller, quieter, more understanding so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. You swallowed your expectations, dismissed your own needs, diluted your identity just to keep the peace. Because part of you was convinced that love had to hurt to be real. That sacrifice was proof. But what you were doing wasn't sacrifice, it was self-abandonment. And no love built on self-abandonment ever lasts. Not really. Because the moment you have to erase yourself to be seen, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in servitude. She didn't choose you. Not truly. She chose the version of you that bent, that waited, that tolerated. And it wasn't because she couldn't see your strength. It was because your strength made her uncomfortable. Because to love you properly would have required her to rise, to meet you where you were. And she wasn't ready for that. Maybe she still isn't. So instead, she kept you in a space where she had the upper hand, where you were the one reaching and she was the one deciding whether or not to receive it. That imbalance became the foundation. And for a while you accepted it. Maybe you even normalized it. But slowly something in you shifted. You stopped mistaking breadcrumbs for a meal. You stopped believing that silence meant peace. You stopped begging to be chosen. Because the truth is, the moment a man realizes his worth, the dynamics of every relationship he's in begin to shift. People who benefited from his doubt start to panic. They try to reel him back in, not with love, but with confusion, with half commitments, with guilt. She might have said she cared. She might have even said she loved you. But love without effort isn't love. It's nostalgia. And nostalgia doesn't build futures. You were tired of being the one who always initiated, the one who always forgave, the one who kept the connection alive while she sat back and decided if it was worth her time. That's not partnership, that's performance. And you were done performing. Not out of anger, but out of wisdom. You realized that love without choice is obligation, and you refused to be anyone's obligation. You stepped back. You reclaimed the energy you used to pour into her and started pouring it into yourself. And that terrified her. Not because she lost someone who needed her, but because she lost someone who finally stopped needing her permission to walk away. And now she's confused. Now she doesn't understand how the man who used to chase, who used to wait, who used to cling, has gone silent, has detached, has found peace in the space where desperation used to live. Because she never expected you to find strength in letting go. She never believed you'd stop playing the game. She thought your need would keep you tethered. But she was wrong. You didn't stop caring, you just stopped convincing. You were never asking for too much, you were just asking the wrong person. You wanted to be seen, not just needed. Chosen, not just tolerated. And now that you've stepped out of that space, now that you've learned the difference, you'll never return to it because you understand what it cost and you're not willing to pay that price again. You're no longer the man who waits to be chosen. It's strange how silence can scream. Not in the moment it arrives, but in the moments after, when she speaks into the void and hears no echo, when she sends the message and sees no reply. That's when the panic sets in, not because she misses you necessarily, but because she realizes that she no longer controls the temperature of your attention. And for someone who once fed off your reactions, your absence is louder than any argument, more disruptive than any confrontation. Because for the first time, she's left alone with the consequences of her own ambivalence. You see, when you were always available, always responsive, always present, she never had to feel the weight of her own inconsistency. You absorbed it, you made sense of it, you soothed the chaos, even if it cost you your peace. And every time she pulled away, you reached further. Every time she grew cold, you turned up the heat. That imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was existential. You became her mirror, reflecting back stability while she wavered, and that made her feel safe, even as she gave you reasons not to stay. But now the mirror is gone, and all she sees is herself. Without your reactions, without your reassurances, without your steady hand reaching out in the dark, she's forced to confront something she's never had to before. The reality of her own choices. Not the narrative she spun about them, not the justifications she leaned on, but the cold, hard truth of what happens when someone stops chasing. And she doesn't know how to handle that. She'll start reaching out in subtle ways, the passive messages, the vague likes, the sudden interest in things you post, even though she once acted like none of it mattered. It's not always a grand gesture, not always an apology. Often it's a test, a way to gauge if the door is still cracked open. And when there's no answer, when your silence holds, it rattles her. Because she thought she could always come back. She thought you'd always want her, even if she never gave you a real reason to stay. This isn't about bitterness. It's not about revenge. It's about boundaries. It's about finally valuing yourself enough to stop entertaining people who only show up when they feel you slipping away. That's not connection. That's possession. And you're not a possession. You're a man who loved deeply, yes. A man who gave more chances than were deserved, absolutely. But also a man who has learned, who has grown, who understands now that love without accountability is manipulation, and that peace without mutuality is just a performance for someone else's comfort. She misses the version of you that tolerated everything. The version that remained emotionally available even when she had emotionally checked out. But that version of you doesn't exist anymore, not because you became cold, but because you finally became whole. You stopped needing her to see your value for it to exist. And that terrifies her, not because she suddenly discovered how much she loves you, but because she never imagined a version of you that didn't orbit her. You were never cruel, you were consistent. And that consistency became her baseline. It made her feel desired, needed, in control. And so she confused your presence with weakness. She misread your depth as dependence. And now, stripped of that feedback loop, she's spiraling not into regret, but into confusion. Because for someone who built their sense of self on being needed, your silence is not just absence. It's rejection. It's a mirror she can't look away from. And every quiet moment, every unreturned message, every unanswered attempt, it all reinforces the truth she tried to outrun. That you've moved on, that you're over it, that you found peace in the very place she used to cause chaos. And let's be honest, there's a part of her that still hopes the silence is temporary. That if she just waits long enough, the old version of you will resurface. That your heart, so forgiving and open before, will come knocking. But she's missed the shift. She didn't see it happen, and now she doesn't know how to undo it. Because you're not being quiet to punish her. You're not withholding to hurt her. You're simply done trying to convince someone of something they never wanted to understand. And in that stillness, in that unwavering calm, lies your strength, because nothing speaks louder than a man who has finally learned to value his peace more than her attention. There's something unsettling about watching someone finally live with the void they helped create. And she will. Not all at once. No, that kind of clarity never arrives in a single moment. It creeps in slowly, like fog slipping under a door. At first, it's just silence. Then it's space. Then it's the realization that the man she used to take for granted is no longer orbiting her world. She's no longer the center. She no longer gets to decide when you matter and when you don't. And that shift, that quiet withdrawal of your energy, it disorients her. Because it's not about whether she cared. It's about the fact that she never thought she'd have to miss you. People rarely mourn your presence while they still have it. Most don't even recognize it. They confuse consistency with obligation. They think your patience means permanence, that you'll always be there because you've always been there. And so they test that. Consciously or not, they push the limits. They play games with time and emotion, assuming that the bond will hold, that you'll hold. And for a while you did. You stayed. You absorbed. You waited. You loved her in a way that made her feel like she had options. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too available, too forgiving, too reliable. And when reliability becomes expected, it gets undervalued. So when you left, not with drama, not with rage, but with quiet finality, it didn't register at first. She assumed you'd circle back, like always, that your absence was a pause, not a conclusion, that you'd cool off, collect yourself, and come back, ready to do the emotional lifting she never learned to carry herself. But time passed, and you didn't return. You didn't text on the anniversary of a memory only you seemed to cherish. You didn't like the photo. You didn't ask how she was sleeping, if she was eating, if she was okay. You disappeared from the rituals that once held her in place. And that's when she started to notice. Not because she missed the version of you she used to ignore, but because she finally had to sit in the silence she helped construct. It's strange, isn't it, how quickly the one who pulled away becomes the one who reaches out when the other stops reaching. Because when you were chasing her, she felt validated, that pursuit was proof of her desirability, of her worth. It wasn't about connection, it was about control, about the assurance that no matter what happened, there was someone out there willing to wait, to plead, to suffer, to stay. But now, the silence she once found flattering has turned into anxiety, because now it's her who's uncertain, her who's wondering, her who's pacing in circles trying to solve a problem she created. And maybe she won't say it out loud. Maybe pride still stands between her and an honest confession. But the signs are there. The sudden curiosity, the half-hearted apologies disguised as jokes, the soft re-entry into your digital world. These aren't accidents. They're echoes of regret. Small tests to see if there's still a place for her in your life. But by now you've seen too much. You've grown too much. You've learned that love isn't proven through endurance alone. It's proven in reciprocity, in effort, in timing. And timing, you now understand, is everything. Because the truth is, she didn't lose you when you walked away. She lost you every time she made you feel replaceable. Every time she asked you to wait while she explored other options, romantic or emotional or otherwise. Every time she treated your loyalty like a leash, not a gift. That's when she lost you. Walking away was just the final act. The real damage was done long before that. It was in the way she assumed you'd always stay. And what she's realizing now, too late, is that you didn't want to leave. You had to. You were forced to choose between preserving her feelings or preserving your self-respect. And that's not even a real choice. That's a survival instinct. Because a man can only diminish himself for so long before the cost becomes unbearable. At some point, it's not about love anymore, it's about dignity. And dignity, once rediscovered, is non-negotiable. So now she's left with her own echo, with the version of herself that didn't believe you'd ever be done. She hears it in the silence, in the gaps where your voice used to be. She feels it in the moments she used to count on you and now has only herself. It isn't punishment, it's balance. It's the universe reminding both of you that there are consequences for how we treat those who give us their heart. And this time, it's your absence, not your affection, that's teaching the lesson. It's a remarkable thing to watch someone slowly realize they no longer have access to what they once believed was permanent. At first, there's a kind of casual disbelief, an assumption that the distance is temporary, that you'll come back, that whatever this is, it's a phase. Because people who grow accustomed to you tolerating their indifference will often confuse your loyalty with weakness. And when you finally choose yourself over them, when you stop playing the part they assigned you, their world starts to unravel in ways they're not prepared for. She notices the difference. Even if she won't admit it, she feels the shift in energy, in posture, and presence. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer justifying why you deserve to be treated better. And that silence, that lack of performance, it says more than your words ever could, because it's not angry, it's not defensive, it's simply absent. And nothing unnerves a person more than the absence of the one they thought they could string along indefinitely. She tries to carry on like before. Same routines, same mannerisms, same little games meant to bait you back into caring, but it doesn't work anymore. Because you're not just behaving differently, you are different. And that unsettles her. She's trying to solve a puzzle that no longer has the same pieces. You're not reacting like you used to. You're not moved by her hot and cold affection. You're not available for the role of emotional caretaker anymore. And when you stop showing up for someone who only appreciated your presence in your absence, they begin to unravel. There's a deep insecurity that surfaces when a person realizes they were never truly needed, only depended on for validation, reassurance, attention. You were her emotional safety net, the fallback plan, the reassurance that no matter how much chaos she stirred, there would always be one person willing to sort through it. But you've outgrown that role. And what she sees now isn't just your back as you walk away. It's the outline of a boundary she never expected you to draw. And maybe she won't say it. Maybe she's still holding on to pride, hoping you'll flinch, hoping you'll crack. But every day you remain silent, every day you prioritize your own peace over her chaos, is another day she has to face the uncomfortable truth that you meant what you said by saying nothing at all. Your absence becomes her mirror, and what she sees isn't flattering. It's all the ways she took you for granted, all the ways she made you feel like an option while expecting to be a priority. That reflection doesn't go away just because she refuses to speak it out loud. It lingers, and slowly it creeps into her words. The ones you do hear when she finally says something like, "You've changed," or "You used to care more," not because she believes it, but because she hopes you'll deny it. Because if you deny it, she still has you. But you don't deny it. You nod. You agree. You have changed. You did care more. And you're done proving it to someone who only started paying attention once your love stopped being convenient. It's in those moments that she realizes what she's lost. Not because you're trying to teach her a lesson, not because you want her to hurt, but because for the first time she's encountering the full weight of her own behavior without you softening the impact. You're not standing between her and the consequences anymore. And that's a lonely place to be, especially when she thought she'd always have you as her emotional fallback. But that fallback is gone because your silence is not an act of war, it's an act of self-respect. You're not ignoring her to manipulate her. You're not being cold to punish her. You're simply living in a reality she never believed would arrive. One where you're free. Free from needing her to understand. Free from begging to be seen. Free from tying your worth to her approval. And in that freedom, she finds her prison. Is all the power she thought she had? It only worked when you still cared enough to respond. Now she's the one checking your page. She's the one wondering if you're thinking of her. She's the one staring at the message she typed but didn't send. Because the silence that once gave her power now surrounds her with regret. And regret, when it's too late, isn't a plea, it's a sentence. And she'll serve it quietly every time she remembers that the man who once would have done anything for her no longer has anything left to give. Because the moment you stopped needing her to come back was the moment you reclaimed everything she took for granted.